Chapter 71. Deferential Treatment. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 71. Deferential Treatment. During the shopping spree, they bought two things. Liang Xiuqin spent more than 3,000 yuan on herself, which was an exceedingly large amount of money. The Wilson tennis racket that they bought for the eldest son cost 15,000 yuan, and they also bought a designer shawl for Mrs. Chen. If Yunxi had gone to the Chen family's house by herself, she could have gone empty-handed or taken some fruit that she had bought from street vendors along the way. Mrs. Chen knew about her situation at the Yun family's house, and she didn't care about superficial etiquette. In Mrs. Chen's own words, the Chen family had no need for anything, and they didn't want her to struggle to buy some trifling gifts. But if her mother wanted to take advantage of her, how could she not set a trap for her and have her bleed some money? This time, quite a lot of money had been bled, so her mother would probably feel distressed for quite a while. However, this money had been spent for Yun Xiling, so her mother probably wouldn't be that distressed. Before leaving the house, Liang Xiuqin pulled Yun Xiling aside to whisper something that she hid from Yunxi to prevent her from eavesdropping. Yunxi glanced at the two of them from outside the window. She wasn't very worried about Yun Xiling trying to embarrass her in front of the Chen family. When Yun Xiling got in the car, she couldn't conceal the pride and gleeful mischief on her face. Yunxi turned her head and glanced at her. It seemed that whatever Liang Xiuqin had been whispering about concerned her and probably meant trouble for her. She had suffered so much misfortune in her last life, and she knew to beware of it in this life. Yesterday, Yunxi had called Jiang Wanyun in advance to let them know they were coming, and so the butler was waiting at the door to receive them. It was Yun Xiling's first time coming to the Chen family's mansion, and her eyes were full of awe as she stared at the luxurious villa from the car window. She glanced at Yunxi, who was asleep in the passenger seat, and she sneered as she looked at her with a disdainful expression. Only she would have the right to come here if she married into this distinguished family in the future. Someone unsophisticated like Yunxi would have no right to socialize with the likes of her. So what if she was grandfather Zhang's favorite? If the Jiang family's second son didn't like country bumpkins like her, nothing would come to fruition. Buzzing with excitement, she took out her compact and started to reapply her makeup. She wanted to appear as flawless as possible. As soon as the car stopped, Yunxi woke up. Before she could even react, Yun Xiling pushed open her door and got out of the car. She greeted the butler at the door courteously, but also obsequiously. "Greetings, uncle, I am Yun Xiling." The butler stared at the girl with a dumbfounded expression, then frowned and asked, "Who are you? Where is the young lady from the Yun family?" Yun Xiling gritted her teeth. Couldn't he see that she was also a lady from the Yun family? Finally managing to muster a smile, Yun Xiling said with a light-hearted expression, "I am Yunxi's sister. I've come with her." Then. "Ah, Miss Yun." The butler ignored her and turned to look at Yunxi, who was still sitting in the passenger seat. He stepped forward to open the door for her very politely. It was as if she was the true majestic princess. Such deferential treatment made Yun Xiling's face darken like a thundercloud. She glared ferociously at Yunxi, and she unconsciously tightened her grip on her bag. How was it possible that that wretched girl, who had absolutely no manners, could actually be more popular than she was? Yun Xiling's attempts to charm hadn't worked on the butler. Yunxi rubbed her eyes and smiled at the butler. "Uncle Chen, we meet again. It's starting to get cold these days, so I'll give you some herbal tea. Remember to drink it consistently. Miss Yun is too kind. I'm old now, but I want to stay by the old man's side for a few more years, so I'll keep on drinking it." The last time Yunxi had stayed at the Chen family's house, she'd noticed that the housekeeper had rheumatism and had specially prescribed a herbal tea for him to drink. It not only helped maintain health, but also helped nurse one back to health, so it was better than taking medicine. The two of them chatted enthusiastically at the door and ignored Yun Xiling. On the small balcony on the second floor, Chen Yichen nonchalantly leaned against the railing. He stared at the uninvited guest at the door ambivalently, then smirked mischievously, and turned around to head back into his bedroom. Chapter 72. Make one lust after him. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 72. Make one lust after him. Translator. Nyo.bo Studio Editor. Nyo.bo Studio. After some pleasantries, Yun Shi glanced at Yun Xiling, who'd wanted to be the center of attention but had failed miserably. Yun Xiling was shooting daggers at her with her resentful eyes. Yun Xiling couldn't conceal her contempt for Yun Shi. She didn't hold back from glaring at her. At this visit, she'd brought gifts for the Chen family. She'd come here on behalf of the Yun family. Bnoldm Yun Shi, that wretched girl, had come here empty-handed, yet here she was trying to take advantage of the situation. How dare she act as if she was the center of attention? Her mother was the one who had paid for the gifts, yet she was trying to compete for the limelight. How shameful! Since she was at the Chen's home and she had never been there before, Yun Xiling dared not act too presumptuous and had to endure the grievances. Yun Shi smiled, and then reminded Yun Xiling that the gift was in the car, as she turned to enter the villa courtyard with the butler. Sister, didn't you take the meeting gift? Yun Xiling looked displeased. Why should she fetch these things like a servant? Aren't you the one who chose it? I don't want to take advantage of you, so wouldn't it seem more sincere if you carried it yourself? Second sister, you came here on behalf of the Yun family, so don't bring shame on the Yun family. Listening to Yun Shi, Yun Xiling was on cloud nine with self-satisfaction. So you realized that I came here on behalf of the Yun family. Then follow behind me, don't talk nonsense, and don't try to show off. Unwilling to see her steal the limelight, Yun Xiling gave her a warning. She was the proud heiress of the Yun family. She had grown up with the affluence of the Yun family and had been the center of attention wherever she went. How could a country bumpkin like Yun Shi, who had just recently returned from the countryside, compare to the likes of her? All right then. You go on ahead. Yun Shi looked at the housekeeper, who had a vexed expression on his face, and stepped back behind Yun Xiling. Jiang Wanyan was pruning flowers in the yard, where many rare varieties of roses and tulips had been planted. Although they were going into autumn, the entire garden was just as vibrant as it had been in spring. Madam, Miss Yun is here. The butler walked on ahead and informed Jiang Wanyan, who was sitting at a stone table as she trimmed and arranged the flowers. Upon hearing his voice, Jiang Wanyan raised her head with a tender smile on her gentle face. Seeing the unfamiliar person standing in front of Yun Shi, she raised her eyebrows slightly, put down her scissors, and waved at Yun Shi. Who is this? Jiang Wanyan glanced at Yun Xiling, who was smiling obsequiously, and turned to ask Yun Shi. Madam, this is... Before Yun Shi could finish speaking, Yun Xiling interrupted her. Hello, madam, my name is Yun Xiling. I am Yun Shi's sister. This is a gift for you. As soon as Yun Xiling spoke, the expression on Jiang Wanyan's face grew sulky. Interrupting someone, disrespecting her sister, and desperate for attention. As a girl, she didn't seem to have any basic manners, and Jiang Wanyan's first impression of her was extremely negative. Jiang Wanyan didn't even look at her. As she turned around, she saw her beloved son coming out of the house. He was about to open his mouth to greet Yun Shi, but Yun Xiling had already heard sounds and turned around. She stared at the figure coming from afar. His tall, elegant figure was particularly eye-catching. Even though he was in casual attire, it was difficult to conceal how suave he was, highlighting his genteel upbringing. Yun Xiling immediately guessed the identity of this person and bowed her head slightly in accordance with the etiquette of a lady's greeting. Greetings, eldest son. My name is Yun Xiling, and I am Yun Shi's younger sister. Nice to meet you, please take care. In order to make herself appear courteous and vivacious, Yun Xiling did not hold back from showcasing her fake, natural poise. This not only made it seem like she didn't have the manners of a lady, but it also made her seem too opportunistic. As she lifted her head, Yun Xiling got a clear look of the figure standing in front of her at close range. With a gray and white casual shirt on his well-proportioned body, off-white trousers, and white casual shoes, he appeared very different from the brusque guy she had seen in the compound before. The mannerisms of the man in front of her bespoke the elegance and assurance of a born and bred blue blood. No wonder he was considered the eldest son who was a giant among men. One glance was enough to make one lust after him. Chapter 73. Uglier than you even though she's a fake. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 73. Uglier than you even though she's a fake. She held her breath, and her heart began to beat wildly. If she could marry such a man in the future, she would never need to worry about gaining a firm foothold in high society. No, if she married him, they would all have to look up to her with awe. Chen Chen narrowed his eyes and playfully looked up and down at this girl who claimed to be Yun Shi's sister. Yun Shi, is this really your sister? Why doesn't she look like you? Yun Xiling was confident that, in her designer dress, she appeared much more charming and tasteful than Yun Shi. She had specially chosen a knit mermaid-hemmed miniskirt to emphasize her feminine body contours and make her appear more curvy. Compared to Yun Shi, whose attire concealed her body lines, she was the one who was properly dressed as a socialite. When Chen Chen had said this, she assumed that he was saying that she was prettier than Yun Shi, so she bowed her head shyly and blushed girlishly. After having seen how sharp-tongued Chen Chen could be, naturally Yun Shi wouldn't think that he was actually flattering Yun Xiling. She really is my sister. Chen Chen glanced at Yun Xiling a couple more times again quizzically and continued, her figure isn't as good as yours, she's not as pretty, and her eyes aren't as big. Are you sure? Yun Shi nodded as she tried not to laugh. Yun Xiling raised her head with a stunned expression on her face and stared at the man who was nonchalantly looking her up and down. Her hand gripped her bag so vigorously that she cut it. As he stared at Yun Xiling, Chen Chen appeared to have noticed something, and he inched closer with a frown on his face. Being watched at such a close distance by such a seductively masculine man was overwhelming for Yun Xiling. Her heart was pounding wildly. This was the first time that a man had ever gotten so close to her. She couldn't hide the gleeful joy she was feeling inside. Although she knew she wasn't the prettiest one, how could a man resist the coquettish and pitiful look of a damsel in distress? Yun Xiling held her breath and lowered her eyes in a coquettish manner. Her kittenish countenance seemed empty of all of the indignation that she had felt moments before. Then, suddenly, Chen Chen made a move on her lower eyelid and swiftly ripped off the eyelid tape on her lids. Yun Xiling cried out in pain, and, only when she looked up, did she realize what had happened. With two uneven-sized eyes, she stared at the man holding the eyelid tape in his hands, and her face got as dark as thunder once again. Chen Chen glanced at the unsightly appearance of Yun Xiling, with her uneven eyes. He shuddered and felt goosebumps rise as he thought about how bizarre she looked. So it turns out that your eyelids are fake, and what are those creepy fly legs on your eyes? Chen Chen turned to look at Yun Shi and thought to himself, yep, this little rascal's natural eyelids and big eyes are much more attractive. Her face was free of makeup, dewy and fresh, unlike those girls with chemicals all over their faces. After being teased by him, Yun Xiling immediately covered her left eye and glared at the eldest son with an exasperated expression. Little Yun Shi, it's bad enough that she isn't as pretty as you, but she's uglier than you even though she's a fake. Yun Shi suppressed her laughter and merely blinked without speaking. At such a time, no matter what she said, Yun Xiling would resent her for it. Chen Chen. Jiang Wanyun couldn't bear seeing her son teasing the girl. She frowned and shook her head. You can't be so rude. Yun Xiling felt aggrieved, but she didn't want to offend the eldest son at this time, so she treated his teasing as a quirk of his personality. Madam, it's okay. The eldest son is simply curious. Yun Shi couldn't help rolling her eyes. In order to please Chen Chen, Yun Xiling was willing to forego her pride. If she had been in Yun Xiling's shoes, she would have slapped him good and proper. Eldest son, here is the Wilson racket that you like. This is my first time visiting, and I don't know what you like, so I hope you don't dislike. My son doesn't like this brand anymore, please take it back. My family isn't in need of such a thing either. But. Yun Xiling's face fell. But my sister said that you like this brand. Chen Yichen didn't even look at her and disdainfully turned around to face Yun Shi. Little Yun Shi, I haven't taken my medication yet. Please come up and help me take my medication. Without waiting for Yun Shi's permission, Chen Yichen reached out to grab the back of Yun Shi's neck and pushed her inside. Chapter 74. This was the gap. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 74. This was the gap. Having been rejected in such a violent manner, Yun Xiling stood there awkwardly and stared at Jiang Wanyun with a pained and aggrieved expression. She'd used the same amount of money that a dress would cost to buy this stupid racket, but the eldest son didn't even bother looking at it. That wretched girl Yun Shi was really taking herself too seriously. How dare she instruct them to buy something so expensive when the eldest son didn't even like it? She shouldn't have boasted about knowing what the eldest son would like. If they had bought something else, perhaps he would have liked it. Just wait until they got home. She would make her pay for putting her in such an awkward situation. Since the eldest son obviously couldn't be counted on, she would have to try her scheme on Jiang Wanyun. If Jiang Wanyun liked her, she would have many more opportunities to visit the Chen family's mansion in the future. As she thought about this, Yun Xiling decided to forget her embarrassment. She changed her face into a flawlessly obsequious expression. Madam, my mother asked me to bring you this shawl. You see, fall is about to arrive, so no doubt it will come in handy. The butler standing on the side glanced at the shopping bag in her hand and said with a blank expression, Madam only uses custom-made shawls. She would never use one from an ordinary brand. I see. Yun Xiling was embarrassed once again. She'd almost forgotten. Mrs. Chen's social status in Jingdu was quite extraordinary, so she probably wouldn't use name-brand items like this. For the truly wealthy and tasteful upper-class families, everything they wore was couture without any brands, so they probably didn't look favorably on name brands. When her mother went into the store to buy the shawl, she'd suffered at how much it had cost. But for Madame Chen, it was merely something beneath her consideration. This was the gap between one blue-blood family and another. Regarding this gap, she was both envious and embarrassed. Miss Yun is very considerate. Please thank your mother for me. My personal designer just sent a batch of clothes for autumn, so I won't be needing this for the time being. Please take this back, but I've taken your goodwill to heart. As a born-and-bred blue blood, Jiang Wanyun refused in a polite, refined manner without resorting to hurting her pride or making her feel humiliated. No matter how embarrassed Yun Xiling was, she could only grit her teeth and bear it. After all, the gap was there. Madame simply looked down on the things people of her level used, and there was nothing she could do about it. But she was unwilling to head home just yet. She looked up and saw that Jiang Wanyun was arranging flowers. Madam, I've studied flower art before, let me help you. With that, she reached for the scissors on the table and eagerly rushed forward to help. No, I'll do it myself. The arrangement of the flowers depends on one's mood, and it will be more fulfilling for me to do it by myself. Please let me help you. This rose has thorns, so you have to be careful not to prick. Yun Xiling was eager to help, but she wasn't careful enough and tripped on the racket she had brought, and her elbow hit a vase on the table. The flower vase crashed to the ground and, with a clatter, it broke in half. The butler was instantly anxious and ran over in a hurry, then lamented in a rueful tone, "Ah, this is Madame's favorite antique vase. It's worth millions." Yun Xiling panicked as soon as she heard the price, and her whole body started shaking uncontrollably. Not only didn't she manage to help, but she'd gotten into trouble instead. Madam, that I'm sorry, that I didn't mean it, that I didn't mean it. How could she afford to compensate for a vase worth millions? Even her parents couldn't afford to take out so much money at once, not to mention what she was capable of getting. Jiang Wanyan's face grew sulky. She was thoroughly fed up with her clumsiness and self-righteousness. All right, for Yunshi's sake, I will let bygones be bygones. You should take your things and leave. As for Yunshi, I would like her to stay for a meal. I'll have my driver bring her back later. Jiang Wanyan stood up and coldly barked out an order, "Butler, please see the guest out." "Madam." As she stared at Jiang Wanyan leaving, Yun Xiling felt both annoyed and irritated. The butler was even more uncourteous, and he took her straight out to the door. Chapter 75. With looks like that, is she worthy? You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 75. With looks like that, is she worthy? As she stood in the living room checking the stitches on Chen-Chen's neck, Yun-Shi was listening to what was going on outside. How can you, the magnificent eldest son of the four great giants, be so venomous toward girls? Don't you realize that you should be chivalrous toward women? It depends on who it is. Her, with looks like that, is she worthy? Chen-Chen glanced over at Yun-Shi and found that she looked really beautiful today. She appeared gentle and unadorned with her hair in a bun. She had an understated elegance. Like a Taoist woman who had come straight from the mountains, there was an otherworldly fairy-like quality to her. Little Yun-Shi, you look so beautiful today. Mom, what do you think? Chen-Chen asked Jiang Wanyan, who had just come in a prideful tone, as if Yun-Shi were his. Jiang Wanyan also noticed that the dress that the girl was wearing didn't look as if it could be bought in a shop. Your dress is really beautiful, elegant, and sophisticated. It's definitely the attire of a high-class lady. But that you didn't buy this dress from a store, am I right? Madam is quite perceptive. This was my grandma's dress from when she was young. I have a lot of them. They're quite antiquated, and they have been left piled up in the utility room. They are all handmade silk with embroidery from the old generations of Jiangnan. This couldn't be bought from a store now. Only her own mother would find these things ugly. In another 10 or 20 years, these clothes would be shown in an exhibition hall. It definitely looks like something rare. Jiang Wanyan raised her head. How are you, by the way? Your family hasn't given you a hard time since you returned home, right? Just now her second sister had been dressed in designer gear from head to toe, but her older sister could only wear the old clothes left by her grandmother. It was pitiful just to look at her. No, Yun-Shi shook her head. She didn't intend to elaborate on the people and matters of her family. The eldest son's injury isn't severe. Go to the hospital tomorrow and have the stitches taken out. You can do it for me now. He seemed as if he didn't understand that it was easier said than done. I want to help, but I don't have any equipment. Go to the hospital tomorrow. The hospital has disinfectants to avoid infection. But Yun-Shi glanced at the unsightly scar on his throat. This scar will probably take some time to disappear. Jiang Wanyan was also worried about this. After all, she only had one beloved son, who was gorgeous and talented, so it would be unsightly for a scar to be left on him. I'll ask someone to buy scar removal medicine tomorrow. Yun-Shi thought about it for a while. The scar removal ointments on the market aren't effective, and most of them are scams. I remember that a certain pharmaceutical's Chinese herbal formula wasn't that bad, but they are a century-old brand. This scar removal drug doesn't have the ingredients of Western medicine. It's a white ointment, pure Chinese medicine. It looks a bit ugly, so usually no one buys it, and they rarely sell it. Where? You give me an address, and I'll have someone buy it. In the Jiangnan area. Yun-Shi thought about it and decided that it was necessary for her to go personally. Let me go in person. The shopkeeper is a little eccentric. Selling medicine depends on fate. If you aren't sincere, then even if you have the money, you won't be able to buy the medicine. In her last life, in order to seek out medicine, she was too impatient and therefore suffered losses. She had single-mindedly waited for a week at the door of the pharmacy before managing to affect the shopkeeper. She was worried that the person sent there would be condescending and therefore ruin things. Jiangnan is quite far away. Jiang Wanyun was worried and was about to ask her son to accompany her, but then she turned around to see Chen answering the phone. Okay, I understand. You call the technical department for a meeting immediately, and I'll come over this instant. After hanging up the phone, Chen walked straight over to Yun Shi and said anxiously, "There's an issue with my company. I have to rush back. As for the Jiangnan area, I can get my driver to take you over." "No need, I'll just take the train. I should be able to resolve the issue in a day. It's not safe for a girl like you to travel alone. I'm not a kid anymore. What is there to worry about?" She raised her hand to stop Chen from continuing, and her face had a stubborn expression. "I insist. I can protect myself, so don't worry about me." Moreover, she was going to go there anyway. "All right, you be safe." Seeing her determination, Chen glanced at Jiang Wanyun. "Mom, have the butler give Yun Shi some pocket money. We don't want her to encounter trouble." "All right." Jiang Wanyun called the butler to bring some cash. "No need, I have pocket money." Yun Shi was dumbfounded as she watched the butler pull out a thick pile of cash. This was the so-called pocket money. Chapter 76. I'll break her legs. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 76. I'll break her legs. However, as it was just to buy medicine, Yun Shi refused to accept such an exorbitant amount of money. Chen didn't waste any time talking with her about it either. He took out his card and told her to choose between the card and the cash. "Little Yun Shi, you have to choose one of these two. If you don't want the cash, then take my card. I'm not your wife. Why would you give me your card?" Yun Shi rolled her eyes at him. She didn't know whether he was too trusting or simply wasn't thinking too much about it. How could he give out his card so nonchalantly? How could Jiang Wanyun not guess what he was up to upon seeing her son using both threats and temptations? She liked Yun Shi, and she wouldn't mind having a daughter-in-law. After she took the cash, Jiang Wanyun patted her on the shoulder. "Yun Shi, please just take it. If we had to entrust someone else with buying the medicine, the human, material, and financial resources spent might end up being more than this." Okay. Since she knew she would return whatever money she didn't spend after buying the medicine, it was essentially the same thing. Upon seeing her agree, Chen raised his hand and rubbed her head. "Good. I have to go back to work. You can stay and chat with my mother." Yun Shi looked dazed as she touched her disheveled hair. Why does everyone like to pat her head as if she was a dog? As soon as Yun Xiling returned home, she started crying her eyes out and threw the unwanted gifts on the sofa. Upon hearing the noise, Liang Xiuqin came downstairs and hurriedly ran to her as soon as she saw her baby girl sobbing. "What happened? What happened? Did that wretched girl Yun Shi bully you again?" "Mom! That wretched girl Yun Shi lied to us. The eldest son doesn't like this brand of racket at all. Madam Chen didn't even look at her scarf. She not only made you spend so much money, but she also made me accidentally smash Mrs. Chen's vase. Mrs. Chen kicked me out before I even had the chance to enter their house." Don't cry, don't cry." Liang Xiuqin coaxed her while wiping away her tears. "Where is that wretched girl?" She was pained that she had had to spend more than 3,000 yuan, and they had removed all the labels so the stuff couldn't even be returned. It means that they hadn't gotten any favors, and 3,000 yuan had gone down the drain. Mrs. Chen made her stay for lunch, but kicked me out. I went to their house on behalf of the Yun family, but the wretched girl didn't help me at all and watched me get kicked out. I have suffered a complete embarrassment. She's not worthy of being my sister. How heartless of her. She has no concern for the Yun family at all, only herself. How dare that wretched girl treat you like that and bring shame on the Yun family like this? Just wait till she gets back. I'll break her legs. What a jinx, how useless. Liang Xiuqin became more and more annoyed the more she thought about it. This wretched girl was exploiting the fact that the Chen family was indebted to her, and she was no longer taking her own family seriously. Secretly, Liang Xini was taking delight in Yun Xiling having been embarrassed and decided to fuel the flame. Auntie, clearly that wretched girl Yun she deliberately made things difficult for Xiling because she wanted to intimidate you. If you don't stop her now, she won't ever take you seriously once she has the backing of both the Chen family and the Jiang family. Xiling is beautiful, so marrying into the Chen family shouldn't be a problem at all. If Yun Shi has meddled in this matter and ruined things between Xiling and their eldest son, then it's all going to be too late. I don't need you to tell me that. What a bad sister she is. I shouldn't have given birth to her in the first place. She was a jinx. A scourge. Yun Shi went home after she'd finished eating at the Chen's house. On her way home, she realized that Yun Xiling was going to throw a tantrum. Therefore, she specially brought back the broken vase from Mrs. Chen's home. Sure enough, as soon she stepped into the living room, Liang Xiuqin, Yun Xiling, and Liang Xini were sitting there waiting for her. They seemed to be waiting for her to come back so they could settle the issue. Mom, I'm back. Without giving any of them the opportunity to speak, Yun Shi slammed the broken vase she brought back on the tea table. This is the vase that second sister broke at the Chen family home. It is Mrs. Chen's most beloved antique vase. The butler said it was worth millions. Liang Xiuqin snorted coldly without even looking at it. Yun Xiling had started lying about what happened with the vase as soon as she had returned. She'd said that Mrs. Chen didn't seem to care, so naturally she'd thought that the vase had been broken by Yun Shi who was trying to pin it on Yun Xiling. Evidently, Yun Shi had been the culprit. Otherwise, how could Mrs. Chen not care about such a precious thing? The vase was broken by your second sister because of you, yet you still want to pin this on her. You scourge, why are you so shameless? Chapter 77. In terms of conscience, I'm afraid you have none either. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 77. In terms of conscience, I'm afraid you have none either. Yun Shi was both amused and enraged by her mother's words. In order to shirk her responsibility, Yun Xiling had thrown her under the bus. All right then. It was war. Originally, Yun Shi had felt that this matter could be considered as let bygones be bygones. If Yun Xiling didn't intend to cause trouble, she didn't intend to cause trouble either. However, since her mother seemed to be asking for trouble, she would keep her entertained. Whether the vase was broken by me or Yun Xiling, Mrs. Chen watched it clearly. Would you like me to make a phone call and ask? Ask what? You can't own up to your actions. If it wasn't you, why did you bring back the broken vase? Do you expect me to pay? In your dreams. I really want you to pay, because Yun Xiling broke the vase. If she didn't break Mrs. Chen's vase, why was she kicked out of the Chen's house? As soon as she heard her mention getting kicked out of the Chen family's house, Yun Xiling started crying again. Sister, it was clearly your fault. You didn't even help me after I got kicked out. You are too cruel and heartless toward me. She'd broken the vase. Yun Xiling knew that this matter couldn't be investigated, so the focus must be on her being kicked out of the Chen family's house. She wanted to make sure that her mother would unconditionally be against Yun Shi. Upon hearing this, Yun Shi couldn't help but smile a little and stare coldly at the high-maintenance and pretentious Yun Xiling. In terms of conscience, I'm afraid you have none. Shut up this instant. Xiling was visiting on behalf of the Yun family, and even if you didn't want to help her, how could you side with outsiders who were rude to her? What sort of a sister are you? What use did it do to the Yun family to raise you? She was visiting on behalf of the Yun family. Yun Shi laughed sarcastically. Mom, what do you think the Yun family's standing is in the eyes of the Qin family? I'm not going to sugarcoat things, but how could the Yun family compare to the four big families in Jingdu? The Jiang family has been so courteous toward our family simply because of grandfather. Last time you were around them, you offended grandfather Jiang, who could make dad suffer just by saying a few words. Did you really think that the Yun family is all high and mighty just because we live in a villa complex? You scourge. If you look down on the Yun family so much, why did you come back? You should go back to the countryside. Don't think that just because the Jiang family and the Chen family support you now, that you're all high and mighty. What do you have now that wasn't given to you by the Yun family? Yun Shi's words had struck a nerve in Yang Xiuqin. These were sensitive topics, and she was already fuming with rage. She was truly infuriated at the moment. You all shut up, what are you all arguing about? Coming down the stairs, Yun Yuanfeng had heard Yun Shi's words, and his face grew somber and dark. Seeing Yun Yuanfeng come downstairs, Yun Shi opened her mouth and got straight to the point. Dad, I heard you arguing with Mom yesterday. I also mentioned this to Mrs. Chen today. Upon hearing this, Yun Yuanfeng's expression changed, and his eyes shone more brightly. What did Mrs. Chen say? Will she help me? Grandfather Jiang wasn't there, so Mrs. Chen could help them negotiate with Mr. Jiang so that they wouldn't have any problems in the election. But if no one helped, it was likely that he would get disqualified in this election, and there would be no hope of any future promotions. It wasn't difficult to ask her for help, but then Yun Xiling smashed Mrs. Chen's favorite antique vase, which is said to be worth millions. What Mrs. Chen then said was that she could use her debt to me for saving her eldest son to compensate for Yun Xiling breaking the vase or help Dad by putting in a word with Mr. Jiang. She asked me to choose one. I think Dad's future is more important, so I chose to ask her to help put in a word with Mr. Jiang. Then I brought back the vase fragments. The person who broke it will pay. What? Yun Yuanfeng was instantly stunned. Looking at the vase fragments on the tea table, he felt as if he had been drenched with a bucket full of cold water after being happy for a few seconds. He suddenly turned his head to stare at Yun Xiling, who was sitting on the sofa, and he sounded breathless as he asked, Yun Xiling, please explain to me what is going on. Dad, it wasn't me. My sister has set me up. It's all her fault. It has nothing to do with me. She couldn't afford to pay for such an exorbitant vase. Mrs. Chen may not have pressed the issue with Yun Shi, but that doesn't necessarily mean that she wouldn't press the issue with her. Liang Xiuqin was also getting anxious. Even though she knew that Yun Xiling had broken it, she could never admit to millions of yuan worth of compensation. Chapter 78. Young Marshal Mu climbs through the window. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 78. Young Marshal Mu climbs through the window. Why are you yelling at your daughter? The vase was broken by Yun Shi, that wretched girl, and it has nothing to do with Xiling. She has always been so reliable. How could she not understand basic manners? If Xiling had broken it, the Chen family would have been at our door by now. It must have been Yun Shi's fault, that wretched girl, otherwise why would Mrs. Chen have given her options to choose from? Yun Yuanfeng didn't believe her lame excuse for even a second. He had two daughters, one who cared about his future and another who only caused trouble for him. Yun Shi stared at Yun Yuanfeng innocently. Dad, Mom told my sister that I was awful because I watched Yun Xiling get kicked out of the Chen family house without helping her. However, she broke Mrs. Chen's beloved vase, so of course Mrs. Chen wouldn't let her stay. Of course, if I had broken it, Mrs. Chen would have had no need to let me choose an option. You all can say that I am mean, but I chose to help my dad. Mrs. Chen asked me to choose one option, so I had no choice. Now is the most critical time for Dad, and Dad's future is the most important thing. who didn't know how to play goody two-shoes. She wasn't so easy to bully either. If Yun Xiling hadn't said anything, this matter could have been forgotten, since Mrs. Chen didn't really want to seek compensation for the vase anyway. But if they were going to try and pin the blame on her, they would have to pay a price. Yun Shi's words made Yun Yuanfeng feel relieved. He managed to quell his anger somewhat. Money wasn't the way to deal with Mr. Jiang. But as for that antique vase worth millions, although the Yun family could afford it, they would bear the financial burden for several years. Although his position as vice president didn't make him much money, the money he received through private connections was quite substantial, so he had to acquiesce for the sake of the election. He was going to lose all the millions worth of dirty money he'd received over the years all at once. Thinking of this, his anger toward Yun Xiling further intensified. "Dad, if you think I broke the vase, you can call the Chen family to verify it. The Chen family has paid off the favor their eldest son owes me. You have to deal with the vase. I'm headed upstairs. I'm going to Jiangnan tomorrow to buy medicine for the eldest son and will probably be gone for the whole day." "Okay, go. Stay safe." She'd received a favor for saving the boy's life and had managed to establish connections with the Chen family, so they had a way out. This all made Yun Yuanfeng feel a little more relieved. After she'd gone upstairs, Yun Shi stood at the top landing for a while, listening to the sounds of cups smashing and Yun Yuanfeng shouting coming from downstairs. Yun Shi smirked, turned, and walked back to her room briskly. As soon as she opened her door, she saw the figure sitting on the single sofa by the window. Her eyes got wide and she gasped. She quickly entered the room, closed the door, and locked it. Upon hearing her enter, Mu Feiqi raised his head from reading her medical notes and nonchalantly stared at her rushing toward him. He had overheard all the exciting scenes going on below through the window. This little rascal really did have the most ingenious schemes when conniving against her sisters and her unscrupulous mother. She'd used a vase that Mrs. Chen couldn't care less about to settle things with her sister. At the same time, she'd not only pleased her dad, but also killed the idea of using her to try to get favors from the Chen family. This way she'd also avoided being further manipulated by the Yun family. Even though it had been a favor, she chose to use it in a way that had the most advantage to herself, instead of waiting for them to use her, because then she would have been in a passive position. She'd killed two birds with one stone. She was indeed the prey that he, Mu Feiqi, had set his sights on. Her courage and intelligence made her worthy to stand side by side with him. "Young Marshal Mu, why are you?" Yun Shi glanced at the open window and quickly closed it. "This is the third floor. You must be crazy. I can climb up to the third floor in 5 seconds. Mu Feiqi stood up, took out a steel ball tea cup from his pocket, and hit the small steel ball until it rolled into the corner near the door. "What's that?" Yun Shi glanced at the steel ball that still seemed to be shining in the corner. "Infrared shielding sound waves, which was just developed by my technical department. In short, it is a sound insulation device. When we speak inside, people outside can't hear us." Yun Shi was a little curious, but when she thought of him coming in through the window, she suppressed her curiosity. She snorted and sat down. "I have nothing to do with you, so don't make it seem like we're having a secret love affair." Chapter 79. Token of Love. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 79. Token of Love, Secret Love Affair. Mu Feiqi raised an eyebrow, and his handsome face took on the slightest hint of intrigue. It seemed that the words were quite new to him or that the implications of the words changed when she said them. "Well, I like those words. I haven't used them before, but I could use them a few more times in the future. After all, it's not easy for me to come all the way here and climb through the window to conduct a secret love affair with you." Yun Shi raised her hand and threw the lavender herbal bag she'd just sewed toward him. This room had a stale scent, and, coupled with the unfamiliar environment, she hadn't slept well for the past few days. While she was out, she'd seized the chance to buy some lavender seeds to place in the corner of the bed, so she could sleep well. Mu Feiqi raised his hand and easily caught it. It looked like a medicine bag and smelled the same as this room. Token of love. Well, I'm amused. He shook the lavender bag in his hand and promptly put it in his trousers pocket. Yunshi was at a loss for words, so she rolled her eyes, ignoring his teasing. She stood up and walked toward him, then looked down at him condescendingly. Young Marshal Mu, may I ask your purpose in coming here through the window today? Mu Feiqi stood up and stared at her with a half-dot smile. I had nothing to do, so I came to see you. I didn't expect that instead of seeing the person I wanted to see, I got to enjoy a good show. Recalling the incident that happened downstairs, Yunshi snorted softly in disapproval. She knew that her little gimmicks wouldn't have escaped his eye, so she didn't bother pretending in front of him. To deal with her parents and sisters, she had to use underhanded tactics. The simpler it was, the more effective it was. Seeing her gloating over her triumphant victory, Mu Feiqi was amused and stretched out his hand to squeeze her cheeks. My little Yun, she seems quite good at playing dumb to take advantage of them. It was precisely because of this that he wasn't worried that she would be bullied. If someone dared to bully her, she could handle them single-handedly without his help. Moreover, she would leave them in ruins. Compared to the shady and dirty means the rich and powerful used, her tactics were much more brilliant. The tender sensation in his palm gave him the urge to ravage her. Him messing with her made Yunshi frown. After she had been disfigured in her last life, she had always felt scarred inside and disliked anyone touching her face. Stop pinching my face. Subconsciously, she reached out and pinched his neck as a protest. The two of them started going back and forth, messing around. Mu Feiqi took the opportunity to reach out and pinch her waist and then held onto her as he dropped onto the sofa behind him. Without warning, the two of them fell directly onto the sofa. By the time Yunshi could react, her whole body was in Mu Feiqi's embrace. She couldn't use her strength to resist, so she went all out and gnawed at his mouth. That's right, she gnawed. Their collision on the couch hurt her nose. First he steals her first kiss, which is something that couldn't be repaid, and now this situation. For a moment, she really wanted to strangle him. As she thought about this, she finally managed to stand up, but he saw through her intentions and tripped her with his legs, so she collapsed right back into his arms before she could even stand up straight. Little fellow, your enthusiasm for giving me a hug is really flattering. Jerk. Let me go. She was really annoyed with him, but the more anxious she got the more she couldn't break free of him. Mu Feiqi stared at her exasperated countenance with a smirk on his face. Her cheeks flushed with color from rage, but appeared quite aesthetically pleasing to his eyes. With her face in both of his hands, Yunshi stared at the man in front of her with dark eyes, which gleamed with playfulness like that of teasing a pet. Chapter 80. My little temple can't afford an exalted Buddha like you. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 80. My little temple can't afford an exalted Buddha like you. Yunshi looked dumbfounded. She felt as if she was being teased like a little pet. Young Marshal Mu, you climbed through the window today just to tease me. He was quite beguiling. Who knew how many women had fallen for him? She wasn't an ignorant little girl. After being betrayed by Han Yao Tian, she was wary of men. She was no longer innocent and naive. There were hints of mirth in Mu Feiqi's eyes. His fingers encircled her head and tangled with her messy hair. At this close distance, holding her in front of him, he started kissing her as if he just couldn't get enough. He smiled at her and said dotingly, I just came because I wanted to see you. Feeling as if she had been taken advantage of, Yunshi blushed profusely and issued a warning to him. She reached out her hand and gave Mu Feiqi's face 2 hard slaps. Young Marshal Mu, young children like me are not your target companions. If you mess with me again, you'll have to be careful of your family's second son. She deliberately glanced at his lower body. However, the stern look on her babyish face was so funny that no one could really take her seriously. Mu Feiqi chuckled. His eyes were as unfathomable as a bottomless lake, covered with rippling tides. Little rascal, if you want to target someone in my family, you'll have to wait 2 more years. I'm not interested in immature little girls. He rubbed her head one last time and then slowly let go. As soon as she was freed, Yun-shi stood up and moved away from him. Although she was no match against him in terms of playing dirty and flirting, at least she could evade him. She turned around and started organizing her clothes. She took them out of her closet and put them in her backpack to prepare for the trip to Jiangnan the next day. Mu Feiqi narrowed his eyes when he saw her packing up. Why, aren't you going to start school tomorrow? Where are you going? I have something to take care of. I'm going to Jiangnan. After she'd finished packing, she turned around to glance at the man standing close to her, then frowned slightly. Young Marshal Mu, just tell me what you want. If there isn't anything further, please go away. The window is there, so please feel free to use it. What are you going to do in Jiangnan? How can there be anything more important than the start of school? I'm going there to buy medicine for the eldest son of the Chen family. You're so kind to that smiling backstabber. When he said this, he couldn't discern what was wrong with it. He just felt displeased. His little Yun-shi was even kinder to Chen Yichen than she was to him. She didn't seem to be using the ruse of self-injury to win the target's sympathy. Yun-shi turned her head, glanced at him coolly, then waved her hand dismissively. Young Marshal Mu, my little temple can't afford an exalted Buddha like you. Get out. I will get out. We can go somewhere else. Seeing her being so impatient with him and comparing it to how she treated Chen Yichen, young Marshal Mu became inexplicably moody. He picked her up by the waist and threw her onto the big bed. You. Since she wasn't sure how effective his soundproofing was, Yun-shi dared not scream for fear of attracting the group of people downstairs. But being thrown onto the bed and firmly held down by him wasn't a pleasant situation either. She kicked at him, but he, who was a lot faster than she was, held her down like she was a restless calf. As he looked at her, Yun-shi pulled out the bundle of scalpels he had given her from under her pillow. She pulled one out and held it against his neck without hesitation. Young Marshal Mu, with so many different types of scalpels, which one do you think I should start with? Or, we could try them out one by one. When I lived in the countryside, I dissected small animals. As for humans, I haven't tried it yet. If you'd like me to give it a try, I'd be quite happy to oblige. Little rascal, I didn't give you these things for you to use them against me. He raised his hand and pushed the scalpel that was resting against his neck away, not because he was afraid that she would hurt him, but because she might accidentally hurt herself.